Exploring true crime, mysteries and legends from around the world. Welcome to Tales Beyond Borders.
We all know the names Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, but the sprawling, secret history of Russia hides killers and crimes so bizarre, they almost sound made up. We're talking about everything from a serial killer the Soviet Union initially refused to admit existed, to a murderer who tracked his victims on a chessboard. Today, we're counting down the 10 most infamous crimes to ever crawl out of the shadows of Russia. And these aren't just simple murder mysteries. They're tangled webs of political power, organized crime, and a darkness that was allowed to grow under layers of state secrecy. We're about to get into cases that most people outside of Russia have never even heard of. If you're into true crime that goes beyond the ordinary, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we drop new videos every single week. Kicking off our list at number 10 is a crime that didn't involve back alleys or brutal weapons, but boardrooms and political power. The Yukos affair was a defining moment in post-Soviet Russia. Back in 2003, Mikhail Khodorkovsky was the head of the Yukos oil company, and by most counts, the richest man in Russia. Then one day, he was dramatically arrested on a plane in Siberia. The official charges were fraud and tax evasion, but a lot of people saw it as a political hit. Khodorkovsky had been openly criticizing the Kremlin and was funding opposition parties, which he just didn't do. The result, Yukos, once Russia's biggest oil company, was completely dismantled, and its assets were swallowed up by state-run companies. Khodorkovsky was sentenced to years in prison, which sent a crystal-clear message to other oligarchs about the price of crossing the government. It was a crime that redrew Russia's economic and political map, proving that in the new Russia, absolute power was the only currency that mattered. Next, we're heading back to the total chaos of the 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed. Russia was thrown into a free-for-all, and out of this anarchy rose the infamous Russian mafia. Gangs like the Solntsevskaya Bratva or the Solntsevo Brotherhood basically became more powerful than the government. Starting out in a Moscow suburb, they took control of local transport and the car import business. But by the mid-90s, they were a global operation with thousands of members, involved in everything from drug trafficking to money laundering. This era was wild, with brazen bank heists, kidnappings, and turf wars that left bodies in the streets of Moscow. The Solntsevskaya gang got so big that a 1995 FBI report called it the most powerful Eurasian crime group on the planet. This was a time when organized crime didn't just break the law, it wrote its own. Number 8 is a crime that struck terror right in the heart of Russia's capital during the morning commute. On March 29, 2010, 2 explosions ripped through the Moscow metro, one at Lubyanka station and the second at Park Kultury. The attacks killed 40 people and injured over 100. They were carried out by 2 female suicide bombers who were quickly named Black Widows. This is a term for female terrorists from the North Caucasus, often believed to be avenging the deaths of their militant husbands or relatives killed by Russian forces. One of the bombers was identified as Jonet Abdolova, the 17-year-old widow of a high-profile insurgent who'd been killed just months earlier. An Islamist militant group called the Caucasus Emirate claimed responsibility, vowing the attacks would not stop until Russia granted independence to Muslim states in the area. The choice of Lubyanka station was especially chilling. It's located directly underneath the headquarters of the FSB, Russia's main security agency. Next up is a crisis where the rescue attempt turned out to be just as deadly as the attack itself. On October 23, 2002, about 40 Chechen militants stormed the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow during a performance, taking more than 800 people hostage. The attackers, led by Mavzar Barayev, demanded Russia immediately pull its forces out of Chechnya. For 57 agonizing hours, the world was glued to the news. The crisis ended when Russian special forces made a radical decision. They pumped a mysterious chemical gas through the theater's ventilation system to knock everyone out. The idea was to incapacitate the terrorists before storming the building. It worked on the hostage-takers, but it was also deadly for the hostages. Special forces raided the theater and killed all 40 militants. But more than 120 hostages died, almost all of them from the effects of the gas. To this day, the Russian government has never officially revealed what that chemical agent was, though it's thought to be a powerful fentanyl-based compound. The Moscow theater siege is still one of the most controversial anti-terror operations in modern history. Coming in at number 6 is a crime straight out of a Cold War spy novel, except it was brutally real. Alexander Litvinenko was a former officer for the Russian FSB, or Secret Service, who fled to the UK and became a loud critic of the Kremlin. He even co-authored a book claiming the FSB itself was behind the 1999 apartment bombings to kickstart the Second Chechen War. On November 1, 2006, Litvinenko met 2 former Russian agents at a hotel in London. He fell sick later that day. After being hospitalized, his health went downhill fast. Doctors soon discovered he'd been poisoned with polonium-210, a very rare and highly radioactive substance. For 3 weeks, the world watched him slowly die. From his deathbed, he released a statement directly accusing the Russian president of ordering his murder. A British inquiry later concluded that the two agents he met likely carried out the hit and that it was probably approved at the very top of the Russian government. At number 5, we have a brutal hostage crisis that shows just how savage the First Chechen War was. In January 1996, Chechen commander Salman Raduev led a raid on a hospital in the town of Kislia, taking thousands of civilians hostage. After some negotiation, the fighters were given safe passage back to Chechnya, using about 100 hostages as human shields on their buses. But the convoy was stopped at the village of Pervomeskoy, where Russian forces surrounded them, and that's when things went horribly wrong. For days, Russian forces just hammered the village with artillery, pretty much leveling it. In the end, many of the Chechen fighters actually managed to escape, taking some hostages with them. At least 26 hostages died, along with dozens of soldiers. The whole event was seen as a massive failure for the Russian military and a grim picture of the war's horrific toll on civilians. The story gets even darker at number 4 with a man who used his police uniform to hide his monstrous crimes. Mikhail Popkov was a cop in the Siberian city of Angarsk. To his friends and colleagues, he seemed like a totally normal guy. But from 1992 to 2011, he was secretly the werewolf, a vicious serial killer. His method was terrifyingly simple. He'd use his police car to offer late-night rides to women, drive them to a secluded spot, and then assault and murder them with axes, knives, or screwdrivers. He later claimed he was a cleaner, trying to rid his city of women he deemed immoral. For years, no one could solve the crimes, partly because investigators just never imagined one of their own could be the killer. He was finally caught in 2012 after a huge DNA screening effort. As of today, Popkov has been convicted of 83 murders, though he's confessed to even more, making him Russia's most prolific serial killer in modern history. He's now serving 2 life sentences. Our number 3 spot goes to a killer who turned murder into some kind of twisted game. Alexander Pichushkin had a horrifying goal: to kill 64 people, one for each square on a chessboard. From the early 2000s to 2006, he terrorized Moscow's Bitsevsky Park. He mainly targeted homeless or elderly men, luring them in with the promise of some vodka. Once they were drunk, he would bludgeon them to death, usually with a hammer, and would sometimes shove the empty vodka bottle into their skulls. When police finally caught him in 2006, they found a chessboard in his apartment with the dates of his murders written on 61 of the squares. In a televised confession, he had zero remorse, saying, "For me, a life without murder is like a life without food for you." He was convicted of 48 murders and 3 attempted murders, but he claimed he killed closer to 63. At number 2 is the man whose crimes the Soviet state initially refused to acknowledge, Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov. Between 1978 and 1990, Chikatilo murdered at least 52 women and children across the Soviet Union. He'd find his victims at train stations and bus stops, lead them into the woods, and subject them to unspeakable assault and mutilation. The investigation was severely hampered at first by Soviet ideology. The official stance was that serial killers were a decadent, Western phenomenon that couldn't exist in a communist society. This initial denial led to critical mistakes, including the wrongful arrest and execution of a man named Alexander Kravchenko for a murder Chikatilo later confessed to. Chikatilo himself was even arrested in 1984, but a bungled blood type analysis let him walk free, allowing him to kill for 6 more years. He was finally captured for good in 1990, convicted, and executed in 1994, closing the book on one of the most savage killers of the 20th century. And at number 1, we have a crime so shocking and so controversial that people still argue over who was really behind it. In September 1999, a series of huge explosions destroyed 4 apartment buildings in the Russian cities of Bayansk, Moscow, and Volgodonsk, killing over 300 people in their sleep. The attacks sent a wave of terror across the entire country. The Kremlin immediately pointed the finger at Chechen terrorists, and the bombings became the main reason for launching the Second Chechen War. This crisis made the new Prime Minister Vladimir Putin incredibly popular and catapulted him to the presidency. But then something happened that made people question the official story. Just days after the last bombing, a 5th bomb was found in the basement of an apartment building in a city called Ryazan. Local police arrested 3 people who planted it, and they turned out to be FSB agents. The head of the FSB claimed it was just a training exercise and the bags were full of sugar, not explosives. This explanation has been widely rejected, and many critics, including journalists and former spies, allege the bombings were a false flag operation by the government to justify war and seize power. The full truth may never come out, making this Russia's most haunting and impactful crime. From state's ancient hits to the darkest corners of a killer's mind, these cases show a side of Russia that is often hidden from the rest of the world. They're a grim reminder that behind big historical events and political drama, there are real human stories of terrible tragedy and truly unforgivable acts. The shadows of these crimes still linger, raising questions about justice, power, and the nature of evil itself. Which case did you find the most disturbing? Let us know down in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most shocking crimes.
Thanks for watching Tales Beyond Borders. Subscribe for more true crime mysteries and chilling stories you won't hear anywhere else.